So thanks very much, Barbara, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a few people still coming in, but we're going to get started because time is of the essence, and we've got a great set of male champions of gender equality who we're going to be hearing from this afternoon. So if you've come to hear a conversation with men champions of gender equality and challenging harmful masculinities for better development outcomes, you're in the right place. We're building on a point that Catherine Gibson raised this morning about the importance of getting men on side. So this panel, this plenary is really about that. We have myself, you've heard... Okay, so, Ewan, can you manage that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so you've heard me refer to, I'm Rhiannon Piper, and I'm the coordinator of CGIR, Collaborative Platform for Gender Research, one of the conveners of the conference. This panel, this plenary has been developed with Cynthia McDougall from World Fish, and also with Hazel Malapit from the International Food Policy Research Institute. We have with us today, first of all, Surendran. I keep saying his name wrong, so I'm working hard on that. Rajaratnam, a senior gender research analyst from World Fish based in Penang. We have Stephen Cole, who is based in Zambia, also with World Fish, and is senior scientist for gender. We have Philip Otieno, the executive director of Advocates for Social Change in Kenya, ADSOC. We have actor Ahmed from Bangladesh. He is a country representative for IFPRI, for the International Food Policy Research Institute there, and a senior research fellow. And John McDermott, who is the director of the CGIR research program for agriculture, for nutrition, and health. He's based also at IFPRI in Washington, D.C. So welcome to you all. We're looking forward to hearing from these fellows to reflect on why and how they are prioritizing gender equality in their research and practice, but not only that.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. We're also tackling the incredibly important issue of masculinities. And the reason we're doing that, I think, is one that people, having been through a couple of sessions already, it's probably starting to connect up ideas across that as we're moving from agricultural research for development that is narrow, sort of more production and technology focused, and it's expanding and becoming more complex. At the same time, we're seeing an evolution of gender research that's going from what we can see on the surface to structural barriers, the kind of institutions, policies, norms, stereotypes that create and recreate gender inequalities. And so that's why we're tackling masculinities today, because they're part of that, the part of the iceberg under the surface of the water that we need to start talking about if we're able to engage in this effectively. The first thing, though, to address is, what on earth are masculinities? And for that, I'm going to turn to my colleague. It's my pleasure to work with Suren. And I wanted to ask you, Suren, if you could unpack for us what are masculinities, because I was so excited as you were designing a research project that could have been just a straight up gender analysis, and you said, I want to also understand these in the study I'm doing. These are important. So can you just unpack for us, what do we mean by masculinities?
So masculinities can be defined as an identity or an individual sense of being a man based on what one thinks of this gender, or what, and also what the society says about the subject.
Okay, perfect. Let's take it the next level then, from masculinities in general to the kinds of masculinities that we're probably particularly interested in understanding as part of a transformative process. So can you unpack for us harmful masculinities and why they matter?
Harmful masculinities is not synonym to masculinities. Okay. Harmful masculinities is not synonym to masculinities, and it does not refer to all men or all expression of masculinities. It refers to a limiting, one-dimensional form of gendered behavior that often occurs when expectation of what it means being a man goes to the extent of damaging extent, for example.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that? Like in a household, what would harmful masculinities look like?
So when harmful masculinities takes place, for example, it may put men and women in a box that prevents them from realizing their own potential. For example, when a man thinks that he's strong and he's the sole breadwinner for the family, he may prevent the women from engaging in income-earning activities that may prevent the family from moving out of poverty.
Gotcha. And so it's an effect on men and boys turning into men, and also women and girls, and the well-being of the family as well. Thank you so much, Sren. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon for the next question.
Yeah, great. So we're going to turn to Steve now. So as part of your broader research in Zambia, you've studied harmful masculinities. Can you describe the effects on women, men, boys, and girls of harmful masculinities?
Okay. Yeah, so working in a rather large floodplain in rural Zambia in the Western Province, we use the concept of the masculine rule, and to better understand the complex relationship between gender inequality and poverty, and specifically as a source of gendered power. And so what it means to be a man in this rural society is to be strong, to be powerful, to be in control, to be the main or final decision maker, to be a fisher, to be a governor of the natural resource base. And so this privileged position of power affords men greater access to natural resources, land, fish, bigger fish, and when those products get sold onto the market, that means greater sources of income. And what our research has found is that men tend to then spend that source of income on personal expenditure, personal consumption. And that could mean anything, but alcohol consumption being a fishing area is rife. Extramarital affairs, men are 3.5 times more likely to engage in extramarital affairs, and this all comes at a cost to their families, their households. And then on the other hand, you have women who don't have the same access to those natural resource base, engage in economic activities that may not enable them to generate the kinds of cash that men do. And then they're forced to then, because of that personal expenditure, are forced to then secure food for their homes, pay school fees and the like. And so following the great work of Sylvia Chant, the onus of dealing with poverty is becoming progressively feminized. And she argues that it's this shift from men as chief breadwinner to chief spender. And so we argue that then this feminization of poverty is actually the result of a change in men's personal expenditure, or what we call the masculinization of spending.
Great, thank you so much.
So, Philip, I'd like to continue along this thread about masculinities and harmful masculinities. And we know from research that Steve has presented that built on this work that it's possible to engage men in social change processes at the community scale, for example. Even though we've just met today, I want to throw you a very, very challenging question. I think you know where this is going. We know that there is a need very much to engage men in social change processes, more than one community at a time. This has to be at scale. It has to be systemic. You've been working in this area since 2001, and you've been aiming to make change at the national level. Can you tell us, is this kind of engaging men in transforming harmful masculinities possible at scale, and how would it happen?
Thank you so much, Kathy. Engaging men at scale is very much possible. And I would like to say, picking from Surendran and Steve, that it's important, first and foremost, to engage men in reflections of what the privileges are to them and how it can hurt them as men and how it hurts their societies. And some of the key things that we've been doing is looking at the 4 R's of shifting power. Number one, you look at issues of recognition of the women, for instance, and their role in the society, and also recognizing the men's role in terms of perpetuating gender inequalities. Then we look at issues of redress, look at historical injustices and how that has affected men, not only men, but as it also affects the women in their communities, in their countries, and in the wider society. Then you look at issues of redistribution of resources, control at the same capacity with men in the communities, and lastly, in terms of representation, how to therefore talk to men about issues of representation of women. And when I talk about redress, I'll give a case example. For instance, in Kenya, you look at the Constitution talks of the 2/3 gender principle, and it is enshrined in the Constitution, yet it takes time for it to be actualized, and that becomes a big problem. So therefore, you need to engage more at a bigger scale in terms of legislation, strengthening legislative frameworks, and making sure that it is incorporated in the documents that guide the national processes. But also, once that is done, then you go to the 4 P's of changing practice. And these 4 P's are, for instance, priorities. What are the quick hanging fruits? What are the things that you want to do very quickly on a larger scale? Then you look at the issues of partners. Who are the people that you will want to engage in this process? And then once you have the partners coming on board, then you look at the issues of participation of women in the processes that you engage in. Because again, in terms of creating the platforms for men to have that personal reflection, it also requires that you identify the fact that you need to speak men's emotional language. And what I mean by this is that you need to show men the benefits of what is happening in their communities, whether if they are underdeveloped, how did that happen? Or what can they do as men? How did they contribute to the underdevelopment? And what can they do differently to be able to make sure that the communities are developed? And that calls upon men to give women space also to be able to do and to take part in community development for better developmental outcomes. And it is important for us to be able to create platforms for men to have what I will call a non-threatening environment for those personal reflections, and also to engage with, at a very smaller scale. You need to start with young boys. In the morning, somebody talked of how are we engaging with schools, for instance? How are we engaging with culture? How are we engaging with religion? And that's something that is important when you want to work with men, and just make sure that they can do it on a larger scale.
Thank you so much, Philip. I really want to pick up on that, but we're going to keep on going down the line for now, and we'll return. Rhiannon, over to you for the next question.
Great, thank you. So, Akhtar, in your role as the country representative for IFPRI in Bangladesh, you're in a unique position to promote and support gender equality both institutionally but also in research. So what I'm curious about is how you got interested in gender equality in the first place.
Okay. About 20 years ago at IFPRI, my colleague, Dr. Agnes Kuisembing, she formed a gender group. And I was kind of curious, what is this gender group? So I signed up in that group. And then there used to be monthly meeting, and there were about 12, 14 members in that group. I was just 2 male, members in that group. And my other male colleague also seldom participated in the meeting, but I continued. And then I used to be quite skeptical about, the gender issues in incorporating in research. But then I slowly, started growing interest in gender. But I did not have an opportunity to use that, gendered research. But then came WIA, that is Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which was developed by IFPRI, USAID, and Oxford. And then Agnes asked, Akhtar, why don't you use this WIA in your national survey, and which we did. And then from that survey, we analyzed the results, and then we found that women's empowerment improves nutrition, household, female and child nutrition. Women's empowerment also improves agriculture diversity, and agriculture diversity improves household dietary diversity. So then I thought, okay, let me write a concept note. I met a Minister of Agriculture in one occasion. I said that I want to present this concept note to the ministry. And she said, okay, come and present. And then I presented in 2014 this idea of ANGEL, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Gender Linkage. And the minister, she got very interested. She said that Ministry of Agriculture will implement this research, and she did.
Great. Thanks so much for that story. Cynthia.
Let's build on that idea of male champions. And so, John, the question for you relates to the fact that it's not, you're well known, of course, as a science director, but you, I think, are probably aware that you rose to fame also at a previous gender conference when someone referred back a decade ago when you were already thinking strategically about how to ensure that gender was embedded in a research agenda. So now let's think about that strategic dimension in terms of male champions, and specifically, what do you think organizations can do to enable men and women to collaborate as champions for gender equality?
Sure. I want to talk about this at two levels. One at the kind of project team level, which I find easier, and then one at the CGR system level, which is very difficult. So first of all, at the project level, I mean, so now and in those times, the development outcomes, it's pretty obvious that gender and equity issues are intimately associated with them. So that's kind of straightforward. And the other thing that's straightforward is you need good researchers who know about gender, good researchers, so you need good social scientists, good economists, good biologists, and they have to work in a team. There tends to be not too many hierarchies, but the masculinities that you have to manage are kind of control versus cooperation. And the other one that I think is really important is expert versus learner, because in these teams we're all learners. And it's a real danger, I think, we all, men and women, fall into the kind of danger of wanting to be an expert. So let me spend more time on the CG level. And this is where I think male champions are quite important, because there's a lot of power in politics that goes on. And the kind of comparison I want to do on the masculinity side is quite a brutal one: extractive versus enabling. And, you know, research is really a people thing, and you need creative people, so you can't extract from them, okay? And this kind of plays out at two levels, I think, when it comes to gender research, and we're at quite a critical stage now in thinking about how to support gender research. So the first thing is that if gender research is important, and I think everybody says it is, then we have to do more than pretend that it's important. We actually have it to give money for research. There has to be real gender research, just like we fund breeding research and molecular biology. So that's absolutely critical. Then the second thing is that, in a sense, it's hard for managers to know everything. I mean, I direct a program that's a vast array of things, some of which I understand and some of which I barely understand or don't understand. And you really need bottom-up processes. So that I hope in this kind of reformulating the form and function of gender research, that we really have a bottom-up process, and we rely, I mean, we've learned so much from communities about how to empower them and make them work. Why can't we apply that to ourselves?
That is a wonderful place to land this, and resonates so strongly with some of the discussions that were going on this morning. So thank you for that, and I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon to now open this up.
Great. So we want to take a few minutes now for you to talk to one or two people who are sitting close to you, and to reflect on, from your own experience, where you've seen effective male champions for gender equality in action. So first of all, some examples, some experiences with that. And then secondly, to reflect on what made it possible for them to be effective male champions. So if you just chat with each other for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to pull out a few of the reflections after that. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Timely, okay.
We usually finish a couple minutes early so they get a bit more time to chat.
No, that's
Or we get more time to react to their...
well, we're pretty well trained
Yeah, well, indeed.
in IFPRI. It's,
Yeah.
when we come to a conference, we always say, "Is this the way we're doing it?"
Okay.
So after this, we will open the floor for questions.
Yeah.
Comments.
So more for their experiences, and then Phil will react, first of all, to those experiences, and we'll ask you also if you have any final word or any reaction that you would like to give to the comments and, well, to the experiences that come out. Yeah. Thanks. I think it's really super. People can hear from you and your experiences, and yeah, it's your full-time work working on this stuff. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Harmful masculinities run rampant. Often.
Mics, and then you keep the two mics you have for.
Sometimes I get so upset. I said for sure, without in two new areas, climate change. We've gone through it. And so some of them don't pretend like you're the savior.
So we're just 6 minutes into this buzz, and once you, just so you know.
So there's not well, so there's not. This is the end of this. No, it feels like you're trying to cross a river and you decide to run the river.
I think that we can have a bit more.
Yes, and so we said,
We're fine now. We're a bit just,
yeah,
we're a little bit early, Eva, but I think
great.
they've had extra
Yes,
time.
and it'll give these guys a chance to.
Quick question. Andrew knows that as soon as he arrives, is expected to say something himself, or
Yeah, and I can.
you can? Okay.
Okay. If I can get your attention back up to the front of the room. I know everyone's having fantastically interesting conversations with their neighbor. But we'd like to hear collectively what you've been talking about. Okay. Okay, so thanks for quieting down. So what we want to do now is to hear back from a few of you as to the examples that you have, the experiences you have with effective male champions, and some reflection also on what made it possible for them to be effective. We have Ewan running around with a microphone, so if you have had something interesting in your discussion that's come up, please indicate and he will run over to you. Oh, sorry, I've got 2 microphones. So, good. We've got one over here.
We were just discussing about the effective term, the effectiveness. So we found, from our discussion, we found that it's more about inspiring other men to be part of this team, this gender work and gender research, and about breaking the stereotype that women are supposed to be take over these responsibilities, and they're supposed to be the part of gender works. And another thing is like, what was that? So, I forgot.
That's a good start. That's a good start. So inspiration and challenging, breaking down stereotypes.
That reminds me. The third part is most of the leading positions they're the men, mostly. So engaging them is kind of a strategy as well. Okay. So to make them part of our, not our, it's like part of the team.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thanks very much. I think we have another point back here. So examples, experiences of effective male champions and how that was possible. Maybe say your name as well or where you're from.
Yes, my name is Brenda from Uganda, and I had a good discussion with Patricia from the US, and we talked about creating a non-judgmental environment for men, for them to be effective, not blaming them like you are the problem, but also telling them about the contribution they can make in society. For instance, talking about their mothers, women as their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, and saying you can do something to improve the situation. And then from there, they will ask, how can I do this? And then I gave an example of our program, the great project which Makerere University is running with Cornell, where we are training scientists to be gender responsive in their work. And they're like, we didn't know this. So we are going to be champions of change because now we know how to integrate gender in our work. So that was very interesting.
Great, thank you. I think some of that links up to what Phil was talking about talking men's language as well. Thank you. Other examples coming up? At the back, great. Anne.
Hi, Ann Tickemeyer from the U.S. Our little discussion group, we're somewhat uncomfortable with the concept of champion. It felt very paternalistic, like somehow we needed protection or assistance or intervention from above. And this may be utopian, but what we agreed was that it shouldn't be something that was special, but it should be something that everybody does as a matter of course, rather than something that we have to seek out and then I'm not unappreciative. I don't think any of us are unappreciative, but we don't want to have to be appreciative. We want to just have this be matter of course.
Great, good point. Thanks so much, Anne. Over here, great one.
Thank you, Juan Gonzalo Jaramillo from CIMIT. So you, Cynthia, you posed a question and we were debating about it. Is it possible to engage men as drivers of change? I have a problem with that question. Is it possible? Yeah, well, but is it possible, that part, or at scale? It is happening. It is not if it is possible. It is a problem if we talk about male champions and we have this still very patriarchal way of thinking. It's happening. It's happening in the field. There are men that are allies, that are partners of gender equality. And then we were thinking about, well, what's your name? Julie from KIT. Julie was mentioning, well, we need more of this example, certainly, of these things. And I think that there's a danger of a single narrative. We're looking at men as obstacles, as pervasive. And one of the main things the first speaker, sorry, your name? Sune. Was saying is, okay, we talk about toxic masculinity. Well, we need to look at also, that's a kind of masculinity, but looking at the Connell theory of masculinity, we need to look at subordinate masculinity. And men that are also the victims and see an incentive compatibility in achieving the gender equality. So that's a point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I think one also was involved in a very interesting campaign for International Women's Day at CIMIT this year called Man Up. And that's something you can chase him down about at the tea break to find out a little bit more. Any last comment from the crowd, from Bella, okay?
Yes, I fully agree with that men can be empathic as well, and this, let's call it like that. But I think the major drive for men to become involved in gender is that if there is an institute, if it's formalized somewhere that you can build a career on tackling these issues, if you become respected in some circle, if you can become part of a community in which you are respected because you are working on gender issues, this will majorly drive change, I think. Okay. So it still is a power thing. I mean, but you cannot be idealistic and just move the power out of the whole thing. But as soon as it's put on a level with status, then I think we can change a lot.
Okay. So the power dimension's also in this part of the story. Thanks, Bella. So I want to turn to Phil. He's come a long way, and he's come specifically for this panel, although he will be joining us in the other sessions also. So Phil, can you reflect a little bit on what you've heard from the audience and also from the other speakers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rhiannon. Let me start by the first respondent. I didn't get your name, but sorry. I like what you said about inspiring and I think that connects with the last speaker about how then you need to inspire men to believe and they know that this is something that they can work on. Because number one, remember I said, men do not live in isolation. We live with women. And actually we came from women, right? And therefore, you just need to come out with points that make them to see that other perspective and the angle upon which you want them to be engaged. That's very important. So that inspiration is very key. And it's also important, Brenda, I like what you said, and that's exactly what I was talking about. When you say you need to engage with men in a non-threatening environment and actually allowing them, you don't need to blame them, Because over a period of time, when we sit as, a lot of times when feminists sit together, there's a narrative that goes on that you are bad. You are the ones who have made us to suffer this much. You are doing this, you are doing that, and men don't like that. And sometimes you just need to tell them, because not all men benefit from patriarchy. Not all men benefit from patriarchy. Because even some of them who would want to change have actually been forced to engage to wear that jacket to look manly. So it's important also to understand and recognize the fact that they behave in a certain way because of those, the socialization processes and the patriarchal tendencies. Now, Anne from the US, talking about whether you need this or not, I think what we are talking about as champions is really to make sure that we shatter and we unpack patriarchy. How does it affect men? Because it's not only about how does patriarchy affect men towards not to be engaged in women empowerment, so to speak, but how does it affect them as men? Because it does. When I'm told that I'm the breadwinner and I don't have a job, how that affects me, because it emasculates me as a man. Therefore, if my woman is the provider, then I'll look at it and say, oh no, this is not right. Yeah, things are not working correctly. So it's not only about looking at it from the angle of empowering women, but also at the angle of which we are saying, how does it affect men also? And in terms of obstacles that we have, if you give me a minute, yeah, yeah, I would like to say it's important in every community. You can't have a one jacket fits all. Every community, you have to go to those communities and identify, what do you want to do with men? What type of men? What are they engaged in? And from when you're telling them to practice gender equality, what is in it for them? And how does it affect them? And finally, I think it's important to engage with men in analysis of the male privileges, the male supremacy, the male order, the male-centeredness, and how that affects them as men and the wider community. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Phil. Super. Okay, so I just want to ask now for the others on the panel, does anyone else want to react to the comments that were coming out from the audience, or to something somebody else on the panel has said? Yep, there you go.
Thanks. No, I think to some of the comments, there's different ways of looking at this, and from my perspective as a kind of research manager, I try to be very pragmatic, and I realize that things aren't going to change overnight. So what is it that I can influence going on now? How do I take advantage of certain advantages that are there to make progress? Because these issues are fundamental to whether we're going to achieve the development outcomes that we're about. And if that's the starting position, then you just kind of figure out the ways to do it. So it's more pragmatic and empirical than theoretical, I think, from my perspective.
Great, thanks. I'll come back to the rest of the panel in just a moment if there's any last points they have, but I want to take advantage. I just see that Andrew Campbell walked in, and I know that he has some really interesting examples of how he's been championing gender equality. He's got a look on his face, which is fantastic now. I thought it would be great if you could just share a couple of things that you've been doing to really progress on this in the Australian international context. Not to put you on the spot, but...
Thanks, Rhiannon. And I'm sorry I missed the start of the session. I was on yet another global teleconference. But one of the things is, this might be an exception at this particular event, but I wouldn't have accepted a position on a manel. But I think at this event we can get away with an all-male panel. But that's one of the things, as a male champion of change, I won't participate in conferences or panels if there aren't enough women involved. And on a couple of occasions, I've accepted keynotes on that condition. And then 6 months later, when the program arrives, you look down and you see, hang on, there aren't enough women here. And so we get back in touch with them and say, sorry, I'm going to have to withdraw unless you fix the problem. And that happened recently at the International Farm Management Association conference in Tasmania. And in fact, Jane and colleagues had to come up with a list of women that they could have invited to speak. So unconscious bias training for everybody, gender awareness training for everybody, guidelines for researchers, looking as much internally as externally, making sure we've got the HR right, getting an overall gender equity policy and strategy in place for the organisation, again looking inside and outside, having a gender committee involving all the people from all the levels in the organisation, chaired by Jane as a gender expert, but with HR and IT and people and a good spread of males on the panel. So a whole bunch of different things. You can't just assume that raising awareness will be sufficient, and you need to model what you're talking about. So we have 70% women on our commission, 70% women among our research program managers, 50% on the senior executive, 80% among our country and regional managers.
Great.
So we're actually slightly in breach of our guidelines now, but I figure overshooting on the gender targets for a year or two is justified given the last 100 years of being overshot the other way.
Great.
So,
thanks.
Yeah, there are a bunch of things that we've done.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. So that's great to hear some of the things that you've been active in as well. I heard about them over drinks the other evening, so I thought that's good if it comes out here as well. For the panel, any last word? No?
Just one saying, which is, this is about culture. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's, the business people say it, they know, yeah. And so this has got to be about changing behavior, it's got to be about culture.
Great. Thanks very much, Don. With that, I'll pass the word over to Cynthia.
Thank you so much. I'm going to repeat that. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is what you said? Okay, perfect. I'm going to write that down. So it is my great pleasure to round up. And in doing so, I wanted to say three very quick things. First is that I just wanted to remind, this is the mundane point. First, I wanted to remind that from here, there are sessions that are starting immediately after this. So it's not a tea break after this. Do proceed quickly, especially to the sessions that are far away. That'll help people out. Second, let's round up to something a little more interesting. And I just wanted to take a second to say that I can imagine what's come out of this panel combined with the discussions that are already happening. I can envision a conference next year where masculinities of all kinds are starting to get woven into our gender analysis. And I can envision an audience in a space like this and a conference group and in fact a network and community of practice that is gender balanced. I'm seeing that happening already, and I think this is a nice sort of check for us year by year as we gather. We can start to look at that. So I'm already imagining a couple of things shifting for us internally. And the only last point I wanted to make was, of course, a very sincere thank you. Of course, to the organizers, ACIR and the Gender Platform and University of Canberra, and all the donors behind that. Thank you so much to Hazel and Rhiannon, who co-organized. Very sincere thanks to each and every one of our male panelists, our male champions and masculinities panelists who came up here and I think embodied some risk-taking in doing so. Thank you for your wisdom, and then last but not least, of course, sincere thanks to everybody here for diving into this with such enthusiasm, and I encourage you to continue in the masculinities sessions that are happening after this. There's a gender transformative approach session, and then to weave this into all the rest of the conversations. So with that, we have some small thank yous. Big round of applause.
A special thank you to the chairs. You know how much goes on behind these sort of organisations, and I've got a small little thank you for both of you too.
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Hi guys, just a quick announcement as you're leaving. Anyone that's heading to the Inspire Centre for any sessions at 2:30, the student ambassadors in green will be at the front door to escort you down there if you don't know where you're going.